Hello and welcome to FinTech Talk. I'm your host, Charles Orton-Jones. Today we're looking at the role of AI in the credit industry. There's a theory that the credit industry is maybe lagging in AI adoption. There's so much theory, there's so much hype, but are banks and credit unions really making the most of these incredible new technologies? Well, to find out, we've assembled, as we always do, a world-class panel. So we're going to be looking at the potential for AI to really transform the credit industry. So without further ado, let me introduce our three panelists. Brandon Newland. Brandon, if you turn your camera on, Brandon is Head of Product and Content Credit Solutions at S&P Global Market Intelligence. S&P Global Market Intelligence, Brandon, is the research arm of the S&P Global franchise. It provides research platforms and tools for clients across asset classes. Brandon, great to have you with us.
Great to be here, Charles.
Great. And one of our perennial favorite guests is the man, the legend, Dr. Ritesh Jain. Ritesh is a former Chief Operating Officer, Digital of HSBC. He's an entrepreneur. He's an investor. He works across India, across the Middle East. He knows Europe and South America well. Ritesh, great to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Charles. It's a pleasure to be here always. And as you rightly said around the topic as well. So credit has always been a judgment business, but AI is making it a learning business now. So I'm sure it's going to be an interesting one.
That's what we're here to do, learn from each other. And completing the lineup is James Brown. James is Chief Executive Officer of Leeds Credit Union. Leeds Credit Union is a financial cooperative with 37,000 members. It provides straightforward, affordable financial services. I think that's a lovely way to put it. James has been in the hot seat for just 8 weeks, and he is a former co-founder and CEO of FinTech New Zealand. James, great to have you with us.
Thanks, Charles. Yeah, I think just to reiterate Dr. Vitesh's comments there, it's a fascinating subject matter, and we probably won't get to cover everything we'd love to in this session, but really looking forward to the discussion. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, we're talking in the midst of a great stock market boom. It's a little shaky, but AI is the subject on everybody's lips. But Brandon, perhaps you could just talk us through it. In the credit world, where are we in the AI hype cycle?
Yeah, great question, Charles. So, coming out of 2023 and kind of the introduction of LLMs, we all know that AI is not necessarily new, right? It's the manipulation of textual data through those LLMs that make it quite exciting for us. But the hype cycle really hit kind of really the zenith or pinnacle in 2024. We've gone through a little bit of a disillusionment period, right, to figure out where can value actually be extracted. And so now what we see from clients is they're really focusing early days on not just cost efficiency plays or growth areas, but a new arm of innovation, right, which is really spawning a ton of the POCs that we see coming into play. It's still very much early days, right, to ensure that, again, these POCs then extract value for these organizations, but exciting times.
Great. And James, perhaps you could just give us your perspective. I mentioned in my introduction that there's tons of great theory out there, but maybe adoption is not as advanced as it could be or should be. How do things seem from your Leeds Credit Union perspective?
Look, I think it depends how honest you want me to be. The reality is that because AI is such a hot topic right now, there's an awful lot of people, I think, that are adopting that they are AI experts. So I think a lot of organizations are having to do a little bit of a sort of a sift and shift to understand actually who the players are in the market that they can actually trust, because deploying AI into your organization can be a challenge. I'll be honest, you mentioned at the start, I've been in the role for 8 weeks. We are not an organization that is far down the line with our AI deployment. And we are very much in our infancy of understanding actually where and how we can deploy it. So it is an exciting topic, but I think the credit world, or the financial services sector, I think is sort of dipping their toe in the water steadily to understand actually where it can make those efficiencies and actually derive a better customer journey, which is ultimately what we're after.
That's fascinating. Ritesh, if we have you, I know your connection might be just a bit shaky just for 2 seconds. Ritesh, I'd like to ask you about the hype involved in AI. I've noticed that because of your experience in the fintech world, you often say of some concepts, no, they've actually been around forever. I mean, is there a tendency to dress up actually pretty old concepts, sort of, credit scoring and stuff like that as AI, when in fact all we're really doing is tweaking some pretty time-honored ideas?
Thank you, Charles. Charles, you know it pretty well, like we were to hit hard, right? That's why I know that we've discussed this in past as well when people talk about the credit scoring, right? And I was having this conversation with one of the gentlemen who sit on the board of Visa early on while I was at Visa. And we were talking about that 2009, we implemented real-time scoring, right? So it is nothing new that we are doing. Now let's be realistic. What has changed is the speed and the cost of computing and the storage and speed. So, like when we, so things have changed, right? What we are talking about is the real time today and moving from a rear view underwriting to real time monitoring and the risk sensing. That's what happened, right? That's where the changes that we are seeing. So it's AI is definitely augmenting, but in the credit risk, from the hype perspective, there's a lot more hype than the reality that how many people are really using AI in a sense to do the credit scoring in the real time and whether they are utilizing that credit score independently or whether they are augmenting that with the human experience and the knowledge. So that's where the buck stops. So yes, there's a hype and adoption is slower, lot slower than expected or marketed in the market.
Okay, so a lot of people think they're maybe doing AI well, but maybe they're not getting the most out of it. Brandon, let's plunge in. Where can AI make real impact in the credit industry?
Yeah, we're seeing it in kind of three different areas, right? And Ritesh kind of touched on this. It's proactive surveillance, right? It's not necessarily changing like the early warning system that folks are doing today, but they're looking at new signals that could augment the experience, right? Whether they're extracting textual data to turn into quantitative data to augment some of these signals, right? Like that's something that we're seeing folks looking at more often, right? Whether they've extracted the right signals and implemented it into their process, again, is still early days, but they're evaluating it as they move forward. The other area we've seen is more of like research discovery, right? Trying to become more efficient as they're going through the research process with either out of the box tools or tools that they're building in house. And then the final component is automating kind of credit memo generation, right? And so there's still some early days and POCs there with the rise of kind of an agentic workflow where you're pulling in multiple data from all these sources to create a credit memorandum. So those are the three areas that we see quite often that clients are quite interested in.
Ask you how new that stuff is, because there seems to be a reasonable consensus that adoption's not as high as it could be. How have these products developed over the last 2 years? I mean, I'm trying to think when ChatGPT was launched. Was it 2 years ago? Brandon, how fast have those products been upgraded with
So I
AI?
think if you look at all of the financial data and technology providers, they're spending a ton of investment, right, in building tools like this out of the box. Because the reality is, and James mentioned it, like folks are still getting up to speed on what AI means to them, right? So we're seeing, we're investing. Ton of other folks in the space are investing because clients are asking us, how can they do it, right? So we're all kind of figuring it out together, aligning on a set of requirements that make the most sense to make it as streamlined as possible. So I see that evolving, over the next 12 months here and kind of crystallizing a bit further as we move forward.
I think, Charles,
Yeah.
I was just going to say on that point, Brandon mentioned there, I think where businesses are slowly introducing it from a low risk point of view is simply allowing their teams and their staff just to play with the likes of ChatGPT, where, they've maybe been a bit nervous to do it in their own personal world, or they're launching Copilot. I think we're starting to see some of that, which is probably quite a nice introduction for an awful lot of people. The bit I'd maybe come back to for what Ritesh said around credit scoring, because the credit union tends and has done historically to support a different part of the marketplace or the financial services sector. We're trying to think about, and not right now, but what can we do in the future to utilize AI and AI tools to make sure those that are, dare I say, considered financially vulnerable, to make sure that they've actually got an option to actually, be able to access products that necessarily and historically they wouldn't get access to before. And, having been away from the country for a while and you come back to hear statistics like 2022, 17 million people in this country are considered financially vulnerable, but in 2025, that figure now actually tips over 20 million. So I suppose the question is, how can we utilize AI in order to make sure that products and services are accessed to the masses rather than just to the few?
That's a new angle. I hadn't really thought about. So AI can be used to expand financial inclusion.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Ritesh, just to ask you about this risky to use. We're talking about adoption. I mean, is it not a bad thing that the credit industry maybe is a late adopter on some of this stuff? Because if things are unproven, if things are evolving fast, I mean, banks are cautious, aren't they, culturally, by
uh,
necessity?
that's absolutely right. So generally, banks move faster in terms of the technology adoption, but the outcomes that you see in the real market, it's slightly slower because hey, the banks has got a lot of responsibility in terms of dealing with the people's money, right?
Hmm.
And that's where the real risk is. So bank got to be cautious about it. But at the same time, let's double click on the what we are talking about, the credit scoring, and what we are talking about. Space. So as James said rightly about the vulnerability and the vulnerable customer. So financial inclusion is one part. The other part, let's come back to switch gear to the towards the MSME side, right? Today, we have around what 5.4 trillion credit gap in MSME globally, right? And that's a significant number. I'll come back to the financial inclusion in a moment. But basically, what we are looking at is from the probability of default to the trajectory of default. That's where we want to get into by using the AI over the period of time. What we want, as Brandon has mentioned about the signals, and what I said, that we want systems to work for the people and for the bank at the same time. And from the risk perspective, so what we want is from point in time approval to continuous risk monitoring, and that's what we want to go to, right? That's where we are looking at, as well as from the static borrower profile to the dynamic borrower identities, right? That's where we are heading towards and we want to. So that's the ideal situation. That's where we would like to utilize AI more. But today, are we in a position in 100%? No, not really. Give me a single example in a financial institution where using AI completely for the SME credit lending. And trust me, when I say this with responsibility and looking into the global market, I could not find a single product, right, where they have implemented 100%, right? What you can do, yes, if you have got a complete profile, if they are your own customer, your complete profile, 360-degree views, and depends on the category of the customer, great. But that's where the bias kicks in, right?
Hmm.
So whether we are going to introduce bias in. So there's a significant balance that we need to find out.
Okay. Brent, I'd like to ask about how people are building these AI technologies. I mean, I can imagine that some of your clients are, tier one banks with tremendous in-house resources, but they still prefer often third-party providers to guide them through this process. I mean, who are your clients, and to what degree do they want to have control and build things in-house and understand things in-house, or are they happy to say to an organization like yours, no, you take the lead?
Yeah, I think like about 12 months ago, it was very much a 50-50 build versus buy. I think now we're seeing a shift to 75 buy, 25% build. Now, that's not to say that the POCs aren't happening and they're not spending internal resources on it, but to physically build kind of an end-to-end tool, similar to what Ritesh is describing, right? Like that's not going to necessarily be front and center for every tier one bank. So like at S&P, we've taken more of an agnostic approach. Like the most important thing we've seen from clients is they need to have kind of AI ready data. So data that can plug into an LLM to generate an outcome critically important, and also built out of the box tools. So we just built a tool that leverages the corpus of S&P Global's ratings research that you can ask, natural language questions to help that kind of research efficiency play that I spoke about earlier. I do want to touch on kind of Ritesh's comment though around kind of this end-to-end process of development and at a bank. Like, look, I don't think that um, it's necessarily a bad thing though that clients are implementing AI kind of as James touched on slowly within certain workflows, right? Kind of ground up. I think that's where we're seeing a lot of the successful POCs land with larger clients, right? Because they have the subject matter expert kind of in that development process in a way organically. So, human in the loop still critically important, but we're seeing that where, the business is participating most in the POC, that's really where the value starts to become extracted.
Great. I mean, James, talking about building, I mean, Leeds Credit Union, so you've only been there 8 weeks, but maybe has the advantage of being small and lean. And now it's got a visionary like you from, straight from your experiences at places like FinTech New Zealand. What's your vision of how the credit union is going to adopt stuff like AI? Because there are going to be so many third-party providers. Do you envision a kind of, I don't know, API-driven, nimble organization that can switch things in, switch things out? I mean, I think building things in-house is going to be tough for you, isn't it?
It will be very tough, and it's interesting actually. Just prior to this call, I was actually on with a potential supplier, just looking at what they could deliver for us, and I really like the phrase that Brandon used there, that sort of human in the loop, because we are and we do come at it from a slightly different angle from a credit union perspective, when we're dealing with a member rather than a customer. But no, we don't. We would love to have the technical capability in-house. We just don't. It's as simple as that. But I suppose I'm in a fairly fortunate position that having spent a long time within the technology world, that I've got a lot of organizations that I've seen grow from MVP all the way through to sort of, scale. So I've got a lot of people chapping on my door saying, we'd like to break into the UK market. Perhaps, we could be your test element. But going back to sort of Ritesh's point as well, being able to use AI in sort of identifying when customers are at risk or put themselves at risk becomes an invaluable conversation tool. The human element then still remains. So no, absolutely, we're gathering the pounds at the moment into the bank to then get ready to prepare that 2026, 2027 will be a build out of our tech stack. Part of it is good, but I will be a little bit unfair that the people that have gone before probably made some interesting choices, and now we have to consider what does that look like going forward.
But James, that's a really lovely expression. This, and I think Brandon as well, the human in the loop, because there may be an assumption, especially amongst, I don't know, younger people who work in fintech, the objective is a fully automated credit institution where everyone is onboarded automatically, the analysis is done robotically and mechanically. James, but does that miss something out? I mean, what's the aim here with AI? Is the aim of AI to replace all workers? I mean, it doesn't seem that way. It seems like we're simply changing the industry from actually a more human-centric one into a
Yeah,
more human-centric one.
I think back to Ritesh's point as well, the reality is now we're getting richer data than we've probably ever got before. How do you then overlay AI on top of that to then enable the human interaction to be much more powerful and much more
Yeah.
robust? We commissioned a report a number of years ago, actually, across the sort of APAC region, to go back to the sort of the Gen Z, if you want to call them that, to ask that simple question, if you were applying for a mortgage, do you want to go via a human, so an analog route, or do you want to go through digital? And there was a lot of presumption made that a lot of the sort of the younger generation would go digital, and actually it was the complete opposite. Almost over 80% of them said that in that instance, that very first time buyer sort of flow, they would prefer human interaction. So I think we're at that sort of balance about freeing up some mundane back-end heavy process orientated things that technology and AI can help deliver, but it's the richness then of the data that I think can have a more meaningful conversation. I've said for years, financial products sometimes aren't the most exciting, but it's that human interaction that adds the value. Now AI in data is also adding an extra layer to that, which is really nice.
Yeah, Ritesh, what's your vision here? I mean, what should these credit institutions be aiming to become? Because it sounds like if AI is taking care of a lot of the really difficult and laborious work, the regulatory work, the research, the surveillance, it actually frees up staff to do some of the more well, value add is an ugly expression, but some of the more entertaining, some of the more challenging, some of the more cerebral human work that the industry requires.
So I will definitely quote some of the regulators, right? And whether it's a Monetary Authority of Singapore, FCA, or RBI from India, right? One principle is very clear, no matter whatever you use in terms of the AI, but be clear that it doesn't dilute the accountability. Simple principle. And that makes sense, right? In terms of the AI, as I said, banks have got a significant amount of responsibility and risk they carry. So they got to be extra careful in comparison to the other sectors when they utilize AI, right? Now, the challenge that I see, it's not about the amount of data. It's basically, as James and Brendan said, it's a poor quality of the data as well as the explainability of AI. So I can give you an example about while I was at one of the largest bank, which is HSBC, and I say that proudly that we hired a third parties to do the audits on us for the explainability of the AI. That's what we were using, right? Now, so that's what required. So significant amount of governance increases. Sorry, to come back to your question, Charles, and it's more down to how do I see that in terms of the human interaction? There's no way you can take the human completely out of the equation, one. And it's a human plus AI. That is the way forward that we are looking at. Whether AI will replace human, no. What AI will replace is the human who are not using AI. So that's what's going to happen, right? So
Okay.
we are seeing the use cases all over the places within the financial institution, right? Whether it's from the customer services or even to an extent into the credit scoring in terms of the augmentation, but not replacing it completely.
That's really promising. And Brandon, we have a question from the audience, which I think works very well because we're interested in how companies can adopt some of the new AI technologies. Question from Georgia Barton. She says, "What do you see as the key technical or operational challenges when moving from small pilots to full enterprise-wide deployment?" Now, you've been through many deployments, I'm sure. What are the challenges from going small to enterprise-wide?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's number one, setting up the right infrastructure to be able to create a productionized version of the tool, right? I think that you lose a lot of speed and performance. Like if you don't really focus on kind of that plan at the outset, creates a ton of challenges. I think the other thing too, just from an operational perspective, is what's the rollout plan for the tool? Like what's the outcome that we're trying to get at? Whether it's across a bank, whether it's across a particular specific group within a particular team, like really just aligning on what does success look like, who's going to be responsible for connecting the dots. Does everyone understand the tool? Does it understand kind of the baseline of AI, right? Like just making sure that there's that knowledge that's being presented. So those are just some of the key areas that we've seen both internally and then externally with our clients.
Yeah, James, I can see you nodding there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the key question there is how we're actually using it. But I was just looking at actually the question that was in the chat as well, and I thought it was a really interesting question. We sort of we don't necessarily sort of go through a customer decision specifically and say AI has made the decision good, bad, or indifferent. I think most people now are understanding that with the likes of open banking, the adoption of open banking, there are different data sources that we can use to try and come to a credit decision. Ultimately, though, the customer can decide how much, how little to share. and that can have a positive or a negative impact. So I think just to answer that question, it's more about how we convey the decision to the member, I think, rather than using AI or open banking, because not everybody is comfortable with those terminologies. So yeah, we again, going back to that sort of like human element, we bring it back to that level that we are taking into consideration your own personal circumstances and then overlaying a framework to get to the right decision for you at this point in your life cycle.
Do you think it would freak people out a bit to hear that a computer has made a decision? I mean, the industry's forever had this problem, James, that people would rather think that a human has
I
purveyed
think
all of their documents and come to some conclusion. But you still think there's a sort of a reticence for people to have to face bad news derived from an AI.
I mean, it depends whether the organization wants to hide behind that, AI made the decision. Sorry, we said no, it wasn't actually my fault. Not something we would potentially do, but I do believe that if you're able to articulate it in a way, and especially from our perspective, where we've got people who are on benefits, as members, so they are really financially vulnerable. So it's very simplified language when we talk to them about our decision. And the other thing is we are a little bit more flexible in other organizations as well. So someone might come to us for a £5,000 loan. We wouldn't give necessarily a hard no. What we might say and what we do say is, look, because of your affordability, because of where you are right now, because of your circumstances, because of your income and your outgoings, we can't do five, but we could do three. And then have the conversation with them about, is that still the right thing for you to be doing? And there might be some other parameters that we would talk to support that decision as well. So again, just coming back to what Brendan said, bringing the human element back in. So yes, using the tools in the background, but then actually articulating that in a human context.
Okay, I think that's why people love credit unions so much. Very human in a world of apps. Rich, I'd just like to ask about your international experience. There's, the old phrase, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. When you look at the Middle East, when you look at the UK, the US, India, do you sense any disparity in terms of speed of adoption? I mean, a lot of this can be held back by regulators. What do you notice? Where should people be looking if they want to look at the cutting edge of AI adoption in credit?
So AI adoption in credit, I would say to an extent, India, to an extent, and now that could go two ways, right? So let me clarify this. In UK, we have got a lot more data on the customer uh, by the virtue of the regulations that we have and the system that we have in place in terms of the governance, right? So we have got a lot more data on the customer. But in India, what happened, specifically for the businesses or even the MSMEs or the retail customers, because the digitization of payment has gone through the roof, right? So a number of transactions, if you see, like India leads payments globally. So basically, you've got a significant amount of data, which is a regulated data as well to back up the decision. So in terms of, it is slightly easier for the companies out there in one jurisdiction over other to utilize the data and put the system behind multiple overlays and come to the credit decisioning, not taking the completely human out of the equation, though that's a different thing, right? So it depends on the segment of the customer, like what they're looking for. Say, for an example, if you're an MSME, if you're doing a revenues of $500,000, and if you need a credit line worth, and they have got access to your data, and if you need a credit line worth of $25,000, and if you're profitable for last 5 years and you're EBITDA positive significantly, it's no brainer, right? And so all the data is available, but let's look into the maturity of the data which is available out there in the other markets, especially in the UK European market for that matter. Because of the open banking, it makes it a lot easier for the UK to exploit the data in a better way. So yes, the regulation does help significantly.
Okay, and Brandon, you have the privilege of viewing the whole world, I suppose, from your position. What do you notice about the disparity in adoption?
I think it really is. The interesting thing here is that it just depends on the individual firm, right? And kind of the mandates set forth by their management team. I mean, you can have large banks that are slower than others. You can have mid-tier banks that are slower than others. Different geographies. I mean, look, if there's innovation that's really being elevated at the firm from the top down, that's where we're seeing the most adoption or the most opportunity for those to kind of lead the charge versus follow, right? So it's really hard to say. Like we see it in every conversation across every region, right? But there's this disparity of adoption versus intent to adopt, right? And kind of meeting the mark with clients individually on that front.
So,
Okay.
Charles, I would like to come back in terms of the regulations and the jurisdiction. That is one thing which common thread across the global markets, what we are seeing in terms of the adoption. The adoption of AI is directly proportional to the maturity of the regulation and the governance in the jurisdiction, right? And there are certain aspects. So, if we talk about the digital public infrastructure in an economy, that makes it a lot easier, right? Because of the kind of an variety of the data that you get. The second thing that I see is the identity and the payments data. If you've got a mature identity in the payments data, that makes it a lot easier to build the systems around it. So it varies, and as well as similarly when it goes to the open banking as well, because that makes it a lot easier. But the fundamental of it comes down to the one thing, and that is the data privacy regulations as well. So what are the data privacy regulations in the different jurisdictions? So that is one of the major factor that differentiates that what would be the adoption in a particular jurisdiction.
Yeah, I'd sort of jump in there, Charles, as well, and say that so what I saw back as early as probably 2016, 2017. So the previous administration actually in New Zealand, when sort of other regulators, and Mitesh has mentioned, you've got the Singapore regulator, you've got the FCA here who were a little bit more forward thinking around sandbox and sort of opening that up. The regulator in New Zealand was very adamant, we do not need a sandbox. Our regulation is fit for purpose. If you want to try something, just come and speak to us. That's all very well, but actually, navigating a regulator to get to the right person is not always the easiest thing. So for years and years, the industry of the sector was sort of saying, give us some guidance. So, I mean, that's over 10 years ago just.
Mm.
And it's only really in the last year and a bit the government has actually launched its AI strategy. However, when you read it, I'm being a bit unfair. There's not an awful lot of substance to it. So I think that there is that opportunity that the regulator can take the lead, but I think with some guidance from industry about what it wants in order to sort of like play with some of this new technology, I think is probably a happy balance.
Okay, we're interesting. We are finding a sort of balance here, a nuance. But Ritesh, final question is really just what should the hype be? I mean, some industries are saying, it's AI or bust. It's AI is going to change absolutely everything. We've heard good reasons why adoption in the credit industry is maybe a little slow, while it needs to be tempered with some other considerations. But fundamentally, how important is AI to the credit industry?
So, Charles, I'll directly come to and I call a spade, right? So, credit is not just a product; it's basically a promise, and AI can help us deliver that promise faster. But obviously, without human, I don't think so, right? Because obviously, we are not that mature at this point of time. We need human judgment, we need ethics, and we need accountability. And that's how it goes. So, according to me, it's a promise for the financial institution and to work ethically. And I have a great respect for the credit unions, building societies across the globe. The reason is if you look into the loyalty of the customer, pick up any financial institution in the world or any top fintechs in the world versus the credit unions or the building societies, they are far ahead in terms of the customer loyalty because the way James said, the way the customers are dealt with and what people remember, regardless of the situation, that how you have been treated. And that's what makes a difference.
That's great. And James, what's the future of AI for your organization? Is it the most important thing on your list for the next year, 2 years, 5 years?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's the most important thing on our list right now, but it is a priority. We are working actually with a government organization that is subsidizing AI training. And I'll go back to the comment I made earlier on where we are just, integrating it into the organization slowly. I've got people, to Ritesh's point, that have been with the organization pretty much since day dot. So they're going through their own journey in terms of, technology adoption and being comfortable with technology. So we're starting slowly, but equally, my head of tech is scouring the market right now for what does that tech stack look like? How does it give us scalability? And then to your point, where does AI play a role in that? So yeah, it is a key consideration.
It's great. And Brandon, really just therefore to finish us off, it sounds as though there's a tremendous amount of work, the applications for AI, as you said yourself, to kick us off in research, in surveillance, with customer relations, in just about every facet of the credit industry. So, what's your advice to organizations who maybe feel as though they're lagging a bit in the AI race?
I think the best thing is bottoms up. What are the outcomes that you want to do, and start small, right? I think picking simplified operational workflows to transform is a great place to start. Having a rubric, you're going to see a ton of different hyperscalers or large providers. Like, what are the kind of must-haves attached to reviewing models or reviewing any of these tools, so that when you go back and say, okay, here I saw 10 different companies over the last, or 10 different tools over the last 2 weeks, you can say, okay, that's what worked for me and that's what didn't work, right? And then really driving towards uh, agreement across senior stakeholders, right? So if there's support, top down and bottoms up, I think that's where we're seeing kind of the most adoption, as I mentioned previously. But it's still
Perfect.
early days, right? We talked about could be the third inning, could be back to the first inning. This is an evolving technology that will continue to have to take it day by day.
Well, it certainly feels early days. And looking at the all the different areas we've covered, it shows there's just tremendous potential that's only just starting to be explored. So I hope we've given the viewers just a flavor of what can be achieved by AI in the credit industry. So from myself, from Brandon, from Ritesh and James, and the production team at FinTech Talk, thank you very much for joining us.